Jack Carter sought nothing more than quiet days with his dog Rex in the Appalachian wild. But fate dragged him back into war. A hidden Humvee, a coded logbook, and a burned ID tag revealed a secret supply network buried on American soil. Men he once trusted turned hunters, and Jack became the target. Every step deeper uncovered betrayal, every bullet aimed to silence him. Only Rex's courage kept them alive as the truth closed in. Join their story of survival, loyalty, and justice, and if it grips your heart, like, subscribe, and share their journey. Dawn took its time coming to the hollow, spilling a pale ribbon of light over the hemlocks and the tin roof that Jack Carter had hammered into place with his own hands. He stood on the porch steps with a chipped mug warming his palm and watched the steam drift like breath in winter. Beside him, Rex sat pressed to his boot, not out of fear but habit, the kind of habit forged from years of standing watch in places where dawn meant the difference between quiet and calamity. Jack breathed the mountain air the way a man tests a door he hopes is locked. He counted heartbeats, listened for the creak across the clearing, the slow tick of the stovepipe cooling inside a thrush somewhere in the thicket, the soft clink of Rex's tag against his collar. The ordinary sounds made a kind of fragile chapel, and Jack tried to kneel to it in his mind. He had traded deserts for this green country, traded duty rosters for weather and wood smoke. Some nights still split open like old seams, but mornings when the ridge was a blue hush and no engine cut, the sky felt like they could hold. He scratched the base of Rex's ear and felt the dog lean into the touch, steady as a promise. "You and me, buddy," Jack said the words quiet enough not to scare the moment away. They set off before the sun cleared the fir tops. Jack carried a day pack, a field knife, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what you're not looking for. He was not hunting anything. He let the woods be what they were. A wide page the wind wrote on. Rex moved at heel, then quartered the clearing in a loose figure-8 reading currents of scent that would never mean anything to Jack. The dog was all muscle and restraint, a dark sable coat with a pale stripe at the chest, his tail held low, his ears flicking like small antennae tuned to a station only he knew. On other mornings they cut to the creek, followed a deer path until the stones gave way to moss and the moss gave way to soft earth. Jack liked the rhythm, the way the ground rose and fell beneath his boots, the small labor of it, the sweat it drew that was honest. A mile off the hardtop, the forest began its old work of swallowing men and their noise. He paused at a black cherry snag and watched a hawk spool up from the shade, one feather drifting loose as a white confession. The land felt clean. He wanted to keep it that way. Rex changed first. It was not a bark, not even a growl, but a held breath that ran through the length of him and seized his tail still. He cut right, then looked back to be sure. Jack knew that look had learned to trust the tilt of a canine's head more than a map or a rumor. "Show me," he said, keeping his voice low, a habit from the war he hadn't bothered to break. Rex ghosted between rhododendron and sourwood until the ground dipped and the air grew cooler. Jack followed the dog into a narrow draw he had crossed a dozen times without noticing the way the leaf litter ran odd in a crescent, the way the briars made a curtain more than a tangle. A stand of mountain laurel arched into a green alcove, damp and dark, even on a bright morning. Rex stopped at the edge, nose-high paws planted. Jack knelt and pushed a glove into the leaves. The forest floor shivered when he pressed as if it were skin over muscle. He peeled back a layer of oak leaves and felt his fingers meet a different cold, not soil but something that kept its temperature with stubborn calm. He brushed harder. A rectangle found him matte gritty, a paint that belonged to another world. He cleared more, and a strip of windshield weathering no glass, just the rubber channel where glass once sat, came up like a relic. The earth held a roofline. For a moment he simply listened to his heart knock. It could have been an old farm truck, a hunter's junker left to rot. But the color wasn't farm green or primer gray. It was that flat, disciplined tan you see crossing a base at noon. He sat back on his heels and worked slower, more deliberate, the way he'd been taught to uncover a pressure plate and Hellman pull don't yank. See the hole before you touch the piece. Rex stayed put, eyes flicking from Jack's hands to the laurel screen. A pair of small scars at the dog's muzzle caught the light. They were old silvery. Jack recognized the hairline tremor in his own fingers and breathed through it. "We're just opening the past, not stepping on it," he told himself, and the dog huffed like he agreed. It took 10 minutes and a branch used as a lever before the dirt sloughed from a corner of hood. The hood's angle met the roof's slope, just so a geometry Jack knew from years of climbing into vehicles in the dark. The front fender, the remnant of a turret ring half sunk in loam, the skeletal suggestion of a gunner's platform, all of it sleeping under leaf rot and time. He had seen Humvees stripped and crated cannibalized for parts parked in rows that looked like graveyards. He had not expected to find one buried in a West Virginia draw under rhododendron and the careful patience of someone who wanted it gone but not disappeared. "Why here?" he asked the trees. Rex's ears tipped forward at the sound of Jack's voice, and then the dog edged around the passenger side nose, traveling the seam between earth and steel, until he stopped at a place where gravel had been poured and tamped, then combed with branches to disguise the neatness of it. Jack slid in on his side, the damp pressing through his shirt, and felt for a seam. The door handle gave after a slow, reluctant minute. When it did, the smell pushed out a cool, closed-in scent of rubber and dust, and the faintest echo of gun oil. Not rot, not cabin mold. The air of something sealed. He lay on his back and pointed his flashlight without turning it on, letting his eyes adjust. The windshield was gone, the dashboard torn clean of anything sharp or identifiable. He saw the outlines of seats cut low to the frame, webbing buckled and then slashed. He had to lay a palm on the steel to quiet the muscle memory that wanted to name the unit the year the hands that last steered it. He did not give names to pieces of metal. He waited for the steadiness to come back. Rex's chest pressed against the outside panel. Then the dog slipped around, shouldered closer, and nosed the threshold as if to say, "Go on." Jack slid farther in. His light found the floorboard mottled with dirt that had drifted in a scatter of maple samaras that had helicoptered down every fall since the burial, a dead beetle turned glossy with time. He nearly missed it, the corner of a case where the mat had buckled. He dug with 2 fingers until the edge of the mat peeled back and a metal box showed itself dark as a closed mouth. He eased it free, felt the weight. The case was standard military, the kind contract shops stamp by the truckload latch hardware with a certain bite, a rubber gasket on the lip, the ghost of a serial stencil long since dulled by grime. No padlock now, either pulled or never used, but the latches held with that stubborn grip he remembered from cold mornings when your hands ache. He opened it on his knee. Inside lay a roll of tools nested with a care that told him whoever last touched them was an orderly soled torque wrench, a small breaker bar, drivers in a checked cloth sleeve, a set of tamper-proof bits he'd not seen in a hardware store, a bundle of labeled hex keys. Tucked along the side, wrapped in a cut-down shop rag, was a laminate tag with a symbol he recognized from years ago. Not flashy, not meant for the public, a unit mark that would draw questions from anyone still paying attention. The corners of the tag were burnt, like someone had tried to erase affiliation without destroying the thing itself. On the underside of the case lid, a strip of Velcro held a grease pencil, and next to it, 3 small adhesive labels stacked like tiny flags. Each had a routing abbreviation, 2 letters, and a number, the kind of shorthand truck drivers use when the schedule is more important than the story. Jack felt the old itch between his shoulders, the one that came when puzzle pieces tried to sit down together. If this Humvee had been stripped, why leave a tidy, specialized tool roll? If someone wanted to disappear, a vehicle, why bury the roofline and comb the gravel and then leave the door capable of opening with patience? It felt less like abandonment than staging. He closed the case and listened. The woods hummed with ordinary business gnats, spun lazy in the air. A squirrel knocked something loose overhead, but the quiet had a weight now, the charged hush of a room just before a verdict. "Okay," he said to the Humvee, to the Laurel, to the dog that watched him like a heartbeat with eyes. "We found you." He hauled the case out and set it on clean ground where the sun reached, then took the strap from his pack and cinched the lid shut. He photographed the interior with his phone, a habit learned too late, but kept anyway, then wiped the screen on his sleeve not to erase prints, but to banish the shine of his own uncertainty. Rex shifted paws, scraping dirt, then leaned against Jack's shin, an ordinary touch that quieted the air the way a hand can quiet a child. Jack let his free hand rest on the dog's shoulder and felt strength move under the coat like coiled rope. "We're not going to rush this," he said. "We do it right." He took one last look into the hollow of the vehicle, then lowered the door as gently as if closing a friend's eyes. On the walk back, the forest's colors felt brighter, as if some curtain had been pulled. The creak sounded different, too urgent where it had been soft, a thing finishing a sentence. Jack didn't speed up, didn't slow down. He moved the way men move who know they have been noticed and are pretending they haven't. Rex matched him step for step, head up nose, sampling a thread of air that kept pulling from behind them and to the left. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Jack paused under the first good light and opened the case again as if daylight might change the story inside. It didn't, but it made the edges honest. The grease pencil had a fresh shine where someone had peeled it recently. The bit set included a rare size used on secured panels Jack had only ever seen in motor pools and places where access was not a right but a rank. He felt it then. Something loosened inside him, the kind of loosening that means the door you test isn't locked anymore. He lifted his gaze to the cabin, to the stovepipe and the porch swing he never sat in, and understood that the little hard-won world he had built plank by plank had been joined by something older, heavier. It had come to his doorstep buried under laurel leaves and a layer of ordinary life, and it was not going to leave, because he asked nicely. Rex looked up at him with that calm, unwavering dog patience. Jack patted the dog's neck once, twice, and felt the decision take its shape, simple as a road fork where the map is quiet, but your feet know. "One step at a time," he said. "We start with what we found." The wind came through the clearing with the smell of cut pine from a neighbor 3 ridges over, and somewhere a screen door snapped shut. The mountains went about their business, and Jack carried the case inside. Jack Carter carried the military tool case inside the cabin and placed it on the wooden table worn smooth from years of solitary meals and careful maintenance work. Rex followed closely, his nails tapping lightly against the planks, his head swinging back and forth as if he expected the world outside to press through the walls. Jack set the latches free and studied the tools again under lamplight, his eyes measuring each detail, searching for meaning in the order. He traced the laminate tag with his thumb, remembering old unit markings that once meant belonging, but now stirred unease. The routing labels gnawed at him most of all because they suggested a pattern, something that demanded the presence of records beyond what was in front of him. He knew the Humvee outside still held secrets, and leaving them buried overnight would only gnaw deeper at his thoughts. Before first light the next morning, he returned to the draw with Rex moving like a shadow beside him. The laurel thicket was wet with dew and carried the smell of moss and clay, and the sight of the half-buried vehicle set his pulse against the rhythm of the woods. He pried the passenger door farther open, brushing soil from the threshold, and forced his way into the rear compartment. Rex circled once, then settled near the hood as if keeping watch. Jack lowered himself onto the corroded frame, running his hands over surfaces until his fingers met resistance. Under the rear bench he felt a shallow cavity. He forced the rusted hinge with his knife's flat spine until the panel creaked up, and there he found a field notebook sealed inside a waterproof pouch. He drew it out slowly, recognizing the texture of military-issued material. The pouch was stained but intact, and when he unsealed it, the air that escaped smelled of ink and leather, faint even after years. The notebook bore an embossed number and the abbreviation OPLOG, not something civilian hands would record. He opened it and studied the handwriting. Precise block letters, columns of dates, short mission notes that ended abruptly. Every page was coded with a substitution system he remembered from his service. It was not complicated encryption like digital ciphers, but the kind of field method soldiers used when transmission was too dangerous. He understood enough to see it was no personal diary but an operational log. The opening lines referred to vehicle deployment regional coordinates and coded personnel markers. His chest tightened at the familiarity. Whoever wrote this had been trained like him, had breathed the same dust once, and the realization that such a log lay hidden in a buried Humvee in West Virginia raised questions with no simple answer. He read fragments aloud in a whisper: R-12 convoy, delayed weather holding, awaiting transfer. He could not interpret all of it without the cipher key, but he knew at once that the log tied the vehicle not to overseas missions but to operations in the Appalachian Range itself. The thought sank into him like ice. Rex whined softly, ears twitching toward the slope behind them. Jack tucked the notebook back into the pouch and slipped it into his pack, his mind already spinning through possibilities. A staged burial of a military Humvee, a preserved tool case, and now a coded operational log pointing to missions in terrain they stood upon. It was no coincidence. He stepped out of the vehicle, brushing dirt from his shirt, and saw Rex pawing at the ground near the front left wheel arch. The dog dug with sharp strokes, throwing up clumps of earth until something hard clinked against stone. Jack crouched quickly and pressed Rex back gently with his arm. He cleared the soil by hand until a small metallic rectangle emerged, discolored by heat and weather but still recognizable. He lifted it into the light. It was an identification tag. The chain, long since broken edges, burned the surface scarred. Half the lettering was gone, but enough remained to spell a last name he recognized. Jack's breath slowed as memory surfaced. During deployment, he had read reports of men lost overseas, men he did not know personally but whose names were etched into after-action summaries. This name had been among them, officially listed as killed during an ambush abroad. Yet the tag lay here unearthed by his own dog in a mountain hollow thousands of miles from the place of record. He closed his fist around the tag and felt the weight of contradiction press down. If the log recorded operations in Appalachia and this tag belonged to a soldier declared dead elsewhere, then the story told by official records was incomplete or deliberately bent. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the tree line not for immediate threat but for some sign that the forest itself would confirm or deny. Nothing moved except a breeze that rattled the laurel leaves like distant applause. He looked down at Rex, whose muzzle was streaked with soil but whose eyes burned steady. "Good find," Jack said quietly, stroking the dog's head with gratitude. The dog leaned into his touch as if sharing the burden of the discovery. Jack wiped the tag clean on his sleeve, reading the serial digits that survived. They matched the format of military ID numbers, and he knew enough to recognize they were authentic. He felt the past pulling at him, voices of men who had trusted the system now tangled in a cover story. He placed the tag beside the notebook inside his pack, careful not to let either item fall free. Standing once more, he considered the Humvee's burial with new suspicion. Perhaps it had not been abandoned in haste, but intentionally left to guard these artifacts. Perhaps someone had hoped time and soil would hide what official ink could not erase. The idea set his jaw tight. He locked eyes with Rex again and spoke almost to himself. This is more than a relic. Someone wanted the truth buried here. The walk back to the cabin felt heavier. Every step crunched with knowledge that could not be unlearned. He thought about the name on the tag, the coded field log, the way the unit marking on the tool case had sparked memory. They formed a chain of quiet signals pointing to a larger shadow. He reached the porch as evening pressed the ridge into long blue shapes. The cabin door groaned when he opened it, and Rex pushed inside first as though checking the corners. Jack placed the artifacts on the table, the tool case, the notebook, the burnt tag, and studied them in the lamplight. They looked small, ordinary even, but to him they were the beginning of a fault line. He poured water into a cup and sat back, letting silence crowd around. His thoughts pulled toward one conclusion. If a soldier listed as dead abroad had died here instead, then official channels were compromised. It was not just a mistake. It was deception. He rubbed his temples and thought about how many hands might be complicit, how deep such a deception could run. Rex curled near the hearth, his amber eyes open and watchful. Jack knew he would need the dog's instincts more than ever. He leaned forward and whispered, "We'll keep it safe tonight. Tomorrow we start asking questions the right way." Outside, a whip-poor-will called, and the night settled heavy on the cabin. Jack closed the notebook, slid the tag into the case, and locked the door against the dark, his heart steady, but his mind wide awake. The scorched ID tag had not left Jack Carter's mind since he found it, its half-burned letters echoing like a voice from the grave. When dawn came, he could no longer sit still inside the cabin. He and Rex returned to the Humvee, the forest unnaturally quiet around them, as though the mountains themselves were holding a secret. Jack bent near the fender, meaning only to check the undercarriage, but the gleam of a hidden lens caught his eye, a trail camera buried in mud and shadow silently watching. Someone had been here before him, someone still keeping vigil over the wreck. Jack felt a pulse rise in his throat as he brushed soil from the camera with his knife. It was no hunter's relic left to rust in the woods. This was modern, its casing clean, the type sold to land managers and security outfits. The memory card slot was still sealed, meaning its contents were intact. He turned the lens toward the light and imagined it capturing him, kneeling Rex, watching the Humvee in the background. Every frame would be a warning flag to whoever placed it here. Rex pressed close to his leg ears, up his body quivering with restrained unease. Jack whispered to the dog, "Easy, boy. We're in their picture now." He slipped the device into his pack, then scanned the trees. Each branch and shadow seemed alive with possibility. It was one thing to uncover forgotten evidence. It was another to realize someone was actively tracking it. He searched the other wheel wells and frame, half expecting to find more lenses, but only silence greeted him. Still, the one camera was proof enough the Humvee was not just a grave of steel, it was bait or a marker. Jack decided not to linger. He secured the camera and hiked back with Rex keeping to his side. The trail behind them felt different, like eyes pressed between the trunks, but no sound of pursuit followed. At the cabin, he set the camera on the table beside the notebook and the ID tag. Together, they painted a troubling picture: hidden equipment, altered records, and now surveillance. He sat for a long while, considering. The trail camera meant one thing above all: whoever maintained the Humvee wanted to know exactly when someone disturbed it. That meant he and Rex had tripped a silent alarm. His stomach tightened at the thought. Still, Jack knew enough from service to recognize that fear was useless without action. He pulled his old handheld scanner from a storage chest, dusted it off, and tested the batteries. The machine hummed faintly to life, its display dim but functional. If the Humvee carried surveillance, it might carry more. Toward evening, he returned once again to the Laurel Hollow, Rex pacing ahead with nose low and tail stiff. The forest light thinned into bronze, and every sound seemed amplified: the scrape of his boots on stone, the sharp call of a crow overhead. He reached the Humvee, crouched inside, and switched on the scanner. At first, the screen gave nothing but static blips, weak reflections of the earth itself. He swept slowly across the dashboard and rear patient, listening to the rhythm of the device. Then a soft pulse flared on the display. He froze. Rex gave a low whine, head tilting toward the glove box. Jack adjusted the frequency, moved the scanner closer, and the signal grew stronger. His fingers found a box wired neatly into the interior wall, half hidden by corroded metal. It was small, rectangular, painted the same flat green as military gear. A stub antenna protruded from its side. He felt its faint vibration, subtle but unmistakable, the hum of active transmission. He pulled it free, his heart pounding. It was a short-range transmitter designed to send bursts of location data. He had seen similar devices overseas used to tag convoys or drop sites. Here, buried inside a vehicle staged to look abandoned, it could only mean one thing. The Humvee was not forgotten. It was part of a living chain. Someone had left it to serve as a waypoint, and the transmitter quietly marked its place to those who knew how to listen. Jack's mind raced. The signal he held in his hand had already sung to the air, announcing his presence to whoever monitored it. Even dismantling it now would not undo the message already sent. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes, steadying his breath the way he once did before patrol. When he opened them, Rex was watching him with steady amber eyes, sensing the tension. "They know, boy," Jack said quietly. "They know someone was here." He removed the power source, pocketed the parts separately, and made his way out of the hollow without looking back. The woods had grown darker, the air cooler, and he walked with measured steps, every sense on edge. Back at the cabin, Jack laid the transmitter beside the trail camera, the notebook, and the burned tag. The collection of objects felt like puzzle pieces, each cut to fit, but still missing their center. He poured water into a tin cup, sat heavily at the table, and studied the evidence. His training told him the truth. A camera to record a transmitter to signal a log to track operations, an ID tag that challenged official history. This was no accident. This was a chain of intent. Night pressed down on the ridge heavier than usual, and silence wrapped the cabin. Rex lay by the door, his ears twitching at faint sounds outside his body, tense ready. Jack rested his hand on the rifle across his lap. The fire's glow painted shadows across the log walls, and the room felt less like a home than an outpost. He thought of the men who once sat in briefing tents overseas, waiting for orders that carried them into danger. Now he was alone, but the weight was the same. He knew the truth he carried was already dangerous. Somewhere, someone would come looking. Jack leaned back, his gaze on the rafters, and whispered to himself, "The past isn't past. It's watching." The words hung in the air as Rex lifted his head, listening to the quiet outside, as though confirming it. The night stretched long, every creak of wood and rustle of leaves, sharper than a knife. Jack kept his eyes open, knowing the next day would bring more than answers, it would bring pursuit. The night after Jack Carter discovered the transmitter was the longest of his life in the mountains. He kept the rifle across his knees while Rex lay at the door, his ears twitching at each sound of the forest. Jack knew the signal from the Humvee had already alerted whoever maintained the site, and he expected company soon. Sleep never came. He sat in the half-light of the dying fire and thought of the names in the logbook, the burned tag, the camera lens staring at him from the mud. By dawn, his resolve was clear. Whoever came for the Humvee would find him prepared. He spent the morning reinforcing the cabin. He slid the oak table across the door, secured the shutters, and moved supplies into corners where he could reach them quickly. Rex followed his every motion, understanding the tension. Jack laid out extra ammunition beside his rifle and kept his sidearm within arm's reach. He filled canteens, checked the first aid kit, and rehearsed routes of escape through the trees. By late afternoon, he and Rex walked the perimeter of the cabin, leaving subtle markers, branches set at odd angles, rocks stacked low signals only he would notice if disturbed. The forest seemed unchanged, but his instincts told him the air had shifted. As night fell again, Rex stiffened suddenly, a low rumble building in his chest. Jack froze, listening. From the hollow came faint metallic clinks, not the sound of deer or bear, but of tools striking steel. He crouched low, rifle steady, and motioned Rex to stay close. Through the cover of pines, he saw faint movement at the Humvee's resting place. 3 figures crouched by the wreck, their flashlights shielded their hands working with purpose. They were not curious wanderers. They carried pry bars, cutters, and compact drills tools meant for quick entry. Jack's heart pounded with recognition. These were professionals, not scavengers. He whispered to Rex, "Stay sharp, boy." The dog pressed closer, his nose lifted to catch scents on the breeze. A sharp click echoed through the ravine as one of the intruders set a small device against the Humvee's door. Jack recognized the shape instantly, a breaching charge designed to cut hinges without a blast loud enough to carry far. He felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Whoever they were, they had come not just to examine the wreck, but to retrieve or destroy what remained inside. He moved carefully around the perimeter, his boots finding soft ground, Rex following like a shadow. As they circled downwind, Rex suddenly halted his body, tense, ears pricked and teeth bared in silence. Jack followed his gaze and spotted a wire stretched low between 2 saplings, nearly invisible in the dim light. He crouched and examined it with the edge of his knife. It was a simple but effective tripwire tied to a flashbang canister. If he and Rex had moved forward unaware, they would have been blinded and disoriented before the intruders closed in. Jack whispered, "Good boy," and stroked Rex's head briefly before carefully disabling the trap. He realized then the intruders were not just here to collect, they were prepared to neutralize anyone approaching. Jack decided to act before the men breached the Humvee. He crept closer, waiting until one figure separated slightly from the others, kneeling to adjust a toolkit. With Rex pressed tight against his leg, Jack moved in swift silence, grabbed the man from behind, and pulled him into the shadows. The intruder struggled, but Jack's grip was firm, his arm around the man's throat, his pistol pressed against his ribs. "Quiet," Jack whispered, and the man froze. Jack dragged him deeper into cover, Rex circling with low growls that promised violence if needed. Under the faint glow of the moon, Jack forced the man to his knees and studied his face. Recognition hit him like a blow. The man's eyes widened in the same moment, shock mixing with shame. Jack spoke his name slowly. "Mason." The intruder swallowed hard, his breath ragged. "Jack, I didn't know it would be you." Memories crashed back years earlier on base. Jack had been an instructor for vehicle maintenance. Mason had been one of his students, a younger soldier eager to learn sharp with his hands, always asking questions about engines and wiring. Jack remembered teaching him how to bypass damaged ignition systems in the field, how to reinforce doors against makeshift charges. Now those same skills were being used against him. Jack's chest tightened with anger and sorrow. "What are you doing here, Mason? Who sent you?" Mason looked down, refusing to answer. Jack pressed the pistol harder, but his voice stayed calm. "You set traps in these woods. You carry charges meant to silence people. This isn't scavenging. This is betrayal." Mason shook his head slowly. "I don't have a choice. They know everything. Once you're in, you can't leave. Jack, you shouldn't have touched that Humvee." His words carried fear more than defiance. Rex growled deeper, his amber eyes locked on Mason, every muscle ready to spring. Jack considered the man he once taught now part of a team sent to erase evidence. It cut him deeper than any wound from combat. He tied Mason's wrists with cord from his pack and pressed him against a tree, leaving Rex to watch him while he moved back toward the other 2 intruders. But his mind was heavy with the knowledge that the enemy was not faceless outsiders. It was men like Mason, once brothers in arms, now turned by money or fear. He returned to the cabin with Rex and Mason in tow, the night air filled with the faint clatter of tools as the other intruders continued unaware. Jack secured the prisoner inside, gagged but unharmed, then turned to Rex. "We've crossed the line, boy. They'll come looking for him and for us." The dog pressed against his leg, a silent anchor against despair. Jack knew the siege had begun. The cabin walls felt too thin to hold what was coming. Jack Carter had tied Mason securely, but the man's warning echoed in his mind, "Once you're in, you can't leave." Jack knew Mason's two partners would notice his absence soon, and when they did, they would not waste time. He checked his rifle, slung his pack over his shoulders, and called softly to Rex. The German shepherd moved to his side, alert and ready. Jack leaned close to the dog and whispered, "We have to move, boy, tonight." He did not wait for dawn. He cut through the tree line behind the cabin, using old hunting trails that twisted uphill, the kind only locals knew. Rex ranged a few steps ahead, pausing often to test the wind, his ears sweeping like radar dishes. Jack moved quietly but quickly, guided by instinct more than compass. He had learned in the desert that survival meant motion, not static defense, and now the lesson carried him into the Appalachian dark. As they descended into a ravine, Jack chose a moment to check one last time inside the Humvee before leaving it for good. He pried open the rear bench, fingers scraping against metal. Something gave way with a dull snap, and a panel came loose. Taped to the underside was a row of laminated shipping labels, still crisp despite the damp. His breath caught as he peeled them free. Each bore routing codes, destinations, and abbreviated transfer points. He read them in disbelief, not foreign bases, but domestic routes, East Coast hubs and mountain depots hidden in plain sight. The Humvee was not a lost vehicle. It was part of a supply chain operating within American soil. Jack stuffed the labels into his pack, sealing them beside the field log and the scorched ID tag. He whispered to Rex, "This wasn't an accident. It was a network." The dog pressed against his knee as if anchoring him. Jack climbed out of the hollow and pushed into the night. By dawn, they were miles from the cabin, moving along a narrow ridge where the forest opened into jagged stone. Jack kept low, using the rocks for cover. He paused to catch his breath, one hand on Rex's collar, when the dog suddenly stiffened. The fur along his spine bristled, and he growled low in his throat, his gaze locked uphill. Jack froze, following the line of the dog's stare. At first he saw only broken stone and brush, but then the sunlight caught the faint glint of glass. A scope. His stomach turned cold. Someone was waiting above with a sniper's nest positioned perfectly to cover the ridge. Jack had seconds to act, but Rex moved first. With a sudden surge, the shepherd lunged forward, barking with a ferocity that shattered the silence. The bark was not fear, but warning, a thunderclap in the still morning. The sniper's shot cracked sparking stone where Jack's chest had been moments before, but Rex's charge had thrown off the aim. Jack rolled behind a boulder, raising his rifle. Rex continued forward, zigzagging, drawing fire away. Jack spotted the muzzle flash a second time and fired 2 controlled rounds. The brush erupted as the sniper rolled out of cover, his rifle slipping from his grasp. Rex reached him first, his teeth bared, pinning the man's arm until Jack closed the distance. Jack trained his weapon steadily. The sniper froze, trapped between steel and fur, his chest heaving. Jack's voice was calm but edged with steel. "You had us dead. Why miss?" The sniper spat dust from his lips, eyes hard. "I didn't miss. The dog saved you." Jack bound his wrists with cord, his mind racing. 2 men at the Humvee, 1 sniper on the ridge, and a hidden network tied by shipping routes across American ground. This was larger than Mason had admitted. Jack knew holding prisoners was a liability, but letting them roam free would be suicide. He gagged, the sniper dragged him to a shaded hollow and left him secured. Rex circled back, panting but unharmed, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of protecting his master. Jack knelt, gripping the dog's scruff, and whispered, "You saved me again. Couldn't do this without you." He felt Rex lean into his hand, steady and loyal. They pushed farther along the ridge, moving west toward deeper wilderness. Jack's pack felt heavier with every step, filled with evidence that painted a picture of betrayal within his own country. The forest was no longer just trees and streams. It was a battlefield without boundaries. He glanced back once, knowing the men behind them would not give up. The network they served was too disciplined, too invested to allow loose ends. He whispered to Rex, "They'll hunt us harder now, but we'll stay ahead." The shepherd trotted beside him, his tail low but his eyes sharp every step in rhythm with Jack's. Together they slipped deeper into the Appalachian wild, the weight of truth pressing them forward, the promise of more danger waiting just beyond the next bend. Jack Carter and Rex pushed deeper into the backcountry until the ridge gave way to a narrow hollow where a stream trickled over shale. Jack set his pack down beneath a leaning oak and crouched with his back against the trunk, finally allowing his legs to rest. Rex drank from the stream, then returned to lie close, his head resting on Jack's boot ears, twitching with every sound. The air was still, but Jack's mind was restless. He pulled the laminated shipping labels from his pack and spread them across his knee. The codes were short, precise, a mix of letters and numbers that meant little to anyone outside the system. But Jack had seen such strings before in convoy manifests and supply rosters. They were routing identifiers pointing to transfer points and warehouses. He traced each one, slowly recalling the rhythm of military logistics. One in particular caught his eye, a code ending in WVCH repeated across several labels. He recognized the abbreviation for a civilian distribution hub just across the border in a neighboring state. The implication chilled him. Military equipment had been funneled through civilian depots, masked as ordinary freight. Jack pulled out his weathered field notebook and began cross-referencing the codes with locations he remembered. He mapped a crude triangle connecting his current region, the civilian hub, and another depot farther east. The pattern looked deliberate, a circuit of movement hidden in plain sight. He whispered to Rex. They moved gear through civilian channels. No one would question a truck with the right paperwork. The dog lifted his head as if listening, then lowered it again, satisfied with Jack's voice. Determined, Jack powered on his rugged laptop, its battery still clinging to life. He entered the codes into an old offline database he had salvaged years ago, one designed to recognize patterns in supply chain records. The screen flickered lines of data filling slowly. At first, the results were fragments, warehouse addresses, contract numbers, authorization signatures. But as the files compiled, Jack saw the deception unfold. Each shipment listed was disguised as agricultural machinery, construction equipment, or medical vehicles. The paperwork bore the hallmarks of authenticity, official seals, routing slips, digital stamps. Yet beneath the surface, the details betrayed the truth. The weights were too high for farm machinery, the destinations too remote for hospital supplies. Every manifest had been altered to pass through civilian depots while concealing the real cargo weapons, communication systems, parts of vehicles like the Humvee he had uncovered. Jack leaned back, the glow of the laptop painting his face in pale light. He rubbed a hand across his beard, anger building beneath his calm exterior. They didn't just bury one vehicle, he murmured. They built a pipeline. He clicked further drilling into contractor information tied to the shipments. Names scrolled by many unfamiliar until one froze him in place. The listed oversight officer for several of the shipments was Colonel David Rourke, retired. Jack's throat tightened. He remembered the man, vividly tall, commanding with a reputation for charisma in front of cameras. Rourke had been the face of their deployment overseas, the officer who spoke at press conferences about progress and sacrifice. He was the one who pinned medals on young soldiers and spoke of honor, while men bled in silence behind the lines. Jack had served under him during the harshest months of the campaign, had watched him rally units in the field. To see his name now tied to falsified shipping manifests cut deep like a betrayal, not just of trust, but of memory itself. Jack stared at the name on the screen until the letters blurred. Rex rose and pressed his head against Jack's arm, sensing the storm inside his master. Jack whispered hoarsely. He was supposed to protect us. Instead, he sold us. He thought of Mason, the former student caught in the act, and now Rourke, the officer who had once symbolized integrity. The pieces were aligning into a darker picture. This network was not a rogue band of thieves. It was tied to leadership men who had worn uniforms and spoken the language of duty. The betrayal carried the weight of authority. Jack saved the files to an encrypted drive, then powered the laptop down to conserve battery. He packed the evidence carefully, each item wrapped and hidden in his pack. He knew the discovery of Rourke's involvement would draw even more danger, but it also gave clarity. The faceless network now had a face, and it was one Jack had trusted in war. As night settled over the hollow, Jack built no fire. He and Rex ate cold rations in silence, the dog chewing methodically, eyes always alert. Jack leaned against the oak, his rifle resting across his lap, and thought of what lay ahead. Exposing a network led by a decorated officer would not be easy. It would mean going against the very institution he had once served. But the evidence in his pack was undeniable, and his loyalty now was not to men like Rourke, but to the truth, to the memory of those whose names had been twisted or erased. He stroked Rex's head, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the fur. "We keep going, boy. We bring this out of the shadows." Rex's tail thumped once against the ground, a quiet affirmation. The night deepened, and somewhere in the distance an owl called. Jack closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, refusing to surrender to sleep. The darkness around him felt heavy, but the betrayal he had uncovered weighed more. The hunt was no longer about survival alone. It was about justice. The revelation of Colonel Rourke's name burned in Jack Carter's mind like a brand. He knew the network behind the buried Humvee was not only active but protected by powerful men who once wore the same uniform he had trusted. Staying above ground meant exposure, so Jack and Rex turned toward the only place the hunters would not expect them to go underground. The Appalachian Range was riddled with abandoned coal mines, tunnels carved by generations who had dug their lives out of the mountain. Jack had scouted many over the years, mapping them quietly in case of emergencies. Now that knowledge would save them. He and Rex moved by night, slipping through gullies and creeks until they reached a rusted gate half hidden beneath honeysuckle. Jack wrenched it open with a groan of corroded hinges, then guided Rex into the black throat of the mine. The air grew cooler, instantly damp with the scent of old stone and iron. Jack switched on his red-lensed flashlight, careful not to use white light that would spill too far. Rex stayed close, his paws silent on the grit. They descended deeper, the tunnel widening into a chamber supported by rotting beams. Jack paused to listen. Water dripped steadily, echoing like a heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, the passage split into three. He chose the middle, guided by faint signs of use, boot scuffs, tire marks, fresh dust displaced by something heavy. The realization chilled him. These tunnels were not abandoned. Half an hour and Jack's light caught something unexpected. Against the wall stood a stack of crates and a fuel drum half concealed by a tarp. He pulled the cover aside and saw license plates nailed crudely to the wood. One bore a string of numbers he recognized from the shipping labels taken from the Humvee. His breath caught. This was a supply point hidden underground, tied directly to the false routes. The crates were stenciled with innocuous words like farm equipment and medical kits, but the weight and shape betrayed their true nature. Jack pried one open with his knife and saw metal cases inside each marked with serials matching military inventory. He whispered to Rex, "It's all connected. This is where the shipments come." The dog sniffed the air and growled low, sensing the unnatural presence of chemicals and oil. Jack's chest tightened with both triumph and dread. He had proof the network used these mines as distribution nodes, and now he stood inside one. He covered the crates quickly, knowing he could not linger. They pressed deeper, the tunnels twisting into a labyrinth. Jack marked their path with chalk, remembering the lesson from old manuals, always leave a way back. Yet the mine felt alive with menace. Every drip of water, every gust of air seemed to carry intent. Then Rex stopped abruptly, his body, stiff ears flat. He blocked the narrow passage with his frame, refusing to move. Jack froze, trusting the dog's instincts. He crouched and scanned the tunnel ahead. At first he saw nothing, just shadows broken by his dim beam. Then his eyes adjusted and he noticed the out-of-place detail. A section of water pipe along the ceiling had been cut clean through its edges, gleaming with fresh metal. Wires ran from the pipe into the wall, half buried but visible to a trained eye. Jack's stomach dropped. It was a sensor trap rigged to trigger the moment someone passed beneath, likely activating an alarm, or worse. Without Rex halting him, he would have walked straight into it. He whispered, "Good boy," and gently rubbed the dog's neck. Rex stayed tense, his amber eyes locked forward. Jack studied the setup carefully. It was not crude, it bore the precision of trained engineers. Whoever placed it knew these tunnels were being used and wanted to secure them from intrusion. Jack disabled the wiring with slow, practiced cuts of his knife, then slipped past with Rex following. The brush with danger deepened his certainty. The network guarded its secrets fiercely, and he and Rex were moving through the heart of its veins. Hours stretched as they wove through the maze, every turn marked, every sound measured. Jack's mind never left the crates and the license plate numbers, the physical confirmation of what the data had suggested. He now carried not just digital evidence, but the memory of hidden stockpiles beneath American soil. It was proof of a betrayal rooted deeper than he had feared. By the time they emerged into a larger cavern, faint dawn light filtered through a collapsed shaft above. Jack let Rex rest his own muscles, aching from tension. He sat against a boulder rifle across his lap and let the silence fill him. He knew the hunters would follow. They had the resources, the motivation, and the knowledge. But Jack also knew he had allies the network could never predict, the mines themselves, the labyrinth of forgotten tunnels, and Rex, whose instincts had already saved them more than once. He looked at the dog and whispered, "We walk deeper, boy. The only way out is through." Rex thumped his tail once against the ground, then lifted his head high, alert and ready. Together they disappeared farther into the mountain, where betrayal hid in stone corridors, and the air itself carried secrets. The tunnels pressed in on Jack Carter and Rex as though the mountain itself wanted to keep them from escape. Hours of cautious progress had left Jack weary but sharp, his instincts honed by the tension of unseen threats. Rex trotted ahead, every step silent, his ears pricking at the faintest echoes. When they reached a bend where the passage widened, Jack caught the flicker of movement just beyond the range of his red flashlight. He drew his rifle and pressed his back to the wall, signaling Rex with a subtle hand gesture. The dog crouched low, a shadow poised to strike. A figure emerged slowly from the gloom, carrying a toolkit and muttering under his breath. He was no soldier, but his jacket bore the faint patch of a logistics contractor. Jack reacted swiftly, stepping out and training his weapon on the man's chest. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, his voice low but firm. The man froze, startled, then raised his trembling hands, dropping the toolkit with a metallic clatter. Rex growled, his teeth bared, ensuring the man did not consider escape. Jack tied his wrists with cords stripped from his pack, then sat him down against a wooden support beam. The contractor's face was pale under the flashlight's glow, his eyes darting from Jack to Rex. Jack leaned close. "You're not here by accident. What are you moving through these tunnels?" At first, the man stammered, insisting he only maintained supply points, but Jack pressed harder, pointing out the shipping labels and the crates they had uncovered earlier. The truth cracked through the fear. The man admitted the shipments were not about spare parts or routine supply. The real target was something far more dangerous, a ledger of customers' records of illicit contracts and detailed agreements for weapons transfers. The Humvee, he explained, had been outfitted to carry such documents. Those pulling the strings wanted the proof hidden within, not for destruction but for control. Whoever possessed the list could dictate alliances and bend enemies into partners. Jack felt the weight of the revelation settle into his bones. This was no smuggling ring. It was a power play where information was more valuable than the weapons themselves. He straightened, trying to mask the surge of anger in his chest. Rex pressed close, his body tense as if he understood the gravity of what they had learned. Jack demanded to know why the network was willing to risk so much just to guard a single wreck in the forest. The contractor's answer cut deeper than Jack expected. With a nervous glance, the man whispered, "Because they knew you would find it." Jack frowned, confusion flashing across his face. The contractor continued haltingly, his words tumbling out as fear overcame caution. He revealed that the group had photographs, clear images of Jack and Rex approaching the Humvee. Not from yesterday, but from weeks ago. They had been tracked long before Jack uncovered the wreck, watched by hidden cameras placed in the wilderness. The discovery had not been a random stroke of fate. It had been bait. The Humvee was left as a lure, a staged piece of theater to pull Jack into the web and test his loyalty. Jack's stomach turned cold. The puzzle pieces shifted sharply in his mind. From the trail camera hidden beneath the fender to the sniper on the ridge, everything aligned into a darker scheme. He was not the hunter stumbling into their secrets. He was the prey they had drawn into the open. Rex growled deep, sensing Jack's unease, the vibration of his warning filling the tunnel like a drumbeat. Jack silenced the contractor with a stern look. He could not afford panic now. He needed clarity. If they knew him by name, if they had been watching for weeks, then every step forward had to be deliberate. Every choice weighed against the possibility of manipulation. Jack considered leaving the man tied in the tunnel, but the risks were too great. Instead, he gagged him securely and dragged him to a narrow alcove off the main path, leaving him in darkness. He whispered to Rex, "We move faster now. They've set the rules, but we'll change the game." Rex leaned close, pressing his head against Jack's leg in quiet solidarity. Together, they continued deeper, Jack's mind racing through memories of Colonel Rourke and Mason. He thought back to the field log, the ID tag, the crates of weapons, and now the revelation of a customer list. Each fragment formed a chain that pointed toward betrayal orchestrated from above. Yet the admission about the photographs gnawed at him most of all. If he had been led here by design, then what awaited him farther inside the mountain was not just danger, but a confrontation with the very architects of the scheme. He clenched his jaw and adjusted his grip on the rifle, the echo of his boots steady against the stone. Rex padded beside him, every sense alive, the perfect partner in a world where shadows concealed enemies. Jack whispered more to himself than to the dog. "If they want me to play their game, then I'll turn it on them." Jack Carter moved through the tunnels with Rex pressed close to his side, his thoughts consumed by the revelation that the Humvee had been bait. Each turn in the labyrinth seemed less like a path of escape and more like a narrowing funnel, drawing him deeper into the design of others. He kept going, chalking the walls when he could, following faint drafts of air that suggested openings ahead. Hours passed before they stumbled into another chamber. This one was different from the rest. A Humvee sat inside, not rusted and broken like the one in the ravine, but preserved, coated in dust as though hidden here deliberately. Jack approached cautiously, brushing his fingers along the cold metal of the door. He opened it, his flashlight sweeping across the interior. The seats were stripped down, the panels reinforced. At first it seemed empty, but Rex began pawing at the floorboard beneath the driver's seat, whining insistently. Jack knelt and pressed his palm against the plate. It felt solid, but when he slid his knife into the seam, the edge caught. With a slow pry, the panel lifted to reveal a narrow compartment lined with steel. Inside lay a black metal case no larger than a briefcase. Jack pulled it out, his pulse quickening. He spun the dial lock, carefully guided by instinct and the worn feel of the metal. It clicked open with a reluctant sigh. Inside, wrapped in waterproof sleeves, were dozens of folded manifests, letters, and stamped authorization sheets. Jack's stomach tightened as he flipped through them. Each was labeled as humanitarian aid relief equipment, emergency medical kits, disaster response vehicles. But the listed cargo weights were far too high, the routing codes familiar. These were the shipments he had already seen echoed in the earlier labels. Only now the deception was laid bare. The supplies had not been sent to relief sites but to domestic militia warehouses scattered across rural counties. The list included addresses, contact names, and quantities of weapons disguised as life-saving equipment. Jack held the documents with shaking hands. This was the ledger the contractor had mentioned, the heart of the scheme. He felt Rex lean against his knee, grounding him as the enormity sank in. If exposed, these files could unravel the entire network. Jack sealed them back inside his pack, double-checking the straps. He whispered, "We have what they're afraid of, boy." They left the Humvee behind and pressed upward until the tunnels opened to daylight. The morning was gray mist rising through the trees. Jack breathed deeply, grateful for fresh air, though he knew it carried new risks. Every step outside was another chance to be seen. He and Rex pushed along a narrow back road, aiming for the cover of a hollow where he could regroup. The silence was broken by the distant hum of an engine. Jack stiffened and crouched Rex, instantly flattening to the ground beside him. A police cruiser rolled slowly up the dirt path, its lights off, but its tires crunching the gravel. Jack's pulse pounded. A uniformed officer stepped out, his hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Easy, son," he called, his voice carrying through the mist. "You look like you've been through hell. I'm Deputy Harris. Folks around here say you've been seen with that old Humvee. I don't want trouble, just want to keep you safe." Jack kept his rifle low but ready, his eyes never leaving the man's stance. The deputy's uniform looked real enough, his badge catching the pale light, but Jack had learned long ago that appearances were the first mask of deception. Harris stepped closer, his tone measured. "You've stirred something bigger than you know. Let me take you somewhere secure. We can go over what you found, make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Jack hesitated. Part of him wanted to trust the offer, to believe there was still someone honest in the uniform. But Rex bristled, his hackles raised a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The deputy noticed and slowed, speaking softer. "It's all right, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." Then he reached toward Jack's pack fingers, brushing the flap. Rex exploded in sound, barking furiously, teeth bared, snapping at the man's sleeve. Jack pulled back instinctively, shifting his weight, rifle rising. Harris froze, his friendly mask slipping in the blink of an eye. The calm tone drained from his voice as his eyes hardened. He said nothing, but the moment was enough. Jack saw the truth. Harris wasn't there to protect him. He was there to retrieve the evidence, the same evidence Jack now carried against his chest. Jack backed away slowly, Rex still growling, his body tense as steel. The deputy's hand hovered near his holster, but he did not draw. Instead, he smiled thinly, his eyes sharp with unspoken threat. "Be careful out here, Carter. Men who carry secrets don't last long." With that, he returned to his cruiser, the tires spitting gravel as he drove away into the fog. Jack remained still. Rex pressed close against his leg until the sound faded. Then he whispered, "You saved us again, boy. You saw what I didn't." Rex wagged his tail once, but remained alert. His amber eyes locked on the road where the car had vanished. Jack knew the trap was tightening. If local law enforcement was compromised, then the net was wider than he imagined. He tightened the pack straps across his shoulders and moved quickly into the trees, determined to stay ahead. Jack Carter moved quickly through the dense Appalachian timberline, the fog hanging low over the slopes like a heavy curtain. The encounter with Deputy Harris left his mind sharper than ever. He knew there would be no more illusions of safety. The network wanted what he carried, but more than that, they wanted silence. By the third day after escaping the mine, Jack found himself cornered near an abandoned ranger station at the edge of a clearing. He chose the building as the ground for what he suspected would be the final stand. The walls were weathered, the windows shattered, but it offered cover and a vantage point over the valley. Jack sat up inside his laptop, balanced on the desk, the encrypted files ready for transmission through a satellite uplink. Rex lay at the door, watching the tree line with his unblinking amber eyes. Dusk bled into night, and then they came. A convoy of dark SUVs rolled into the clearing lights off engines muted. Jack adjusted his rifle scope and counted a dozen men, each moving with professional precision. But it was the figure stepping from the lead vehicle that froze his breath. Colonel David Rourke himself, no longer in uniform but carrying authority in every step. His hair was silver now, his jaw sharp as ever, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Carter," he called, "you've made this harder than it needed to be." Jack answered with silence, his rifle steady, but Rourke raised his hands as if in peace. "Do you know what you're holding? It isn't just contracts or ledgers. It's the rope that will hang some of the most powerful men this country has ever known. Senators, contractors, even generals. If this leaks, the whole foundation cracks. That's why I can't let you walk away." Jack's stomach knotted, his anger rising. "You betrayed everything we fought for," he shouted back. Rourke's voice was calm, almost paternal. "No, I preserved what mattered. Power isn't about ideals, Carter. It's about survival. And you're a liability. You're not supposed to carry the truth. You're supposed to disappear with it." At his signal, the men moved, surrounding the station. Gunfire erupted, glass exploding as rounds ripped through the walls. Jack fired back his Marine training, taking over every movement, precise, conserving ammunition. Rex lunged from window to window, barking ferociously, his body a living shield of loyalty. But numbers pressed heavy, and Jack felt a hot pain rip across his side as a bullet tore into him. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt, his vision narrowing. The laptop flickered before him, the cursor blinking on the file transfer screen. He fumbled with trembling hands, trying to steady the connection. Rourke entered through the shattered doorway, a pistol raised his eyes, cold steel. "It ends here," he said quietly. Jack tried to lift his rifle, but his strength was failing, his body collapsing against the desk. Rourke stepped closer, his aim fixed. But before the trigger pulled, Rex exploded into motion. With a savage growl, the shepherd launched himself at Rourke, clamping his jaws onto the man's arm and driving him to the floor. The pistol clattered away shots, firing harmlessly into the ceiling. Rourke cursed and struggled, but Rex held fast, his weight and fury pinning him down. Jack summoned the last of his strength, his blood slicking the keyboard as he pressed the final sequence. The uplink engaged the files, shooting through encrypted channels toward the journalist whose contact he had memorized. The progress bar filled slowly, agonizingly, and then a soft chime confirmed completion. Evidence transferred. The truth no longer his burden alone. Rourke roared, shoving Rex off and scrambling for his weapon, but Jack raised his pistol with a trembling hand and fired once. The shot struck true, and the colonel fell back against the wall, eyes wide with shock, his empire collapsing in silence. Jack sagged to the floor, gasping, his vision blurring. Rex crawled to his side, blood streaking his coat where shrapnel had grazed him, but his eyes burned bright, filled with loyalty. Jack placed a weak hand on his companion's head, whispering through broken breath, "You did it, boy. We did it." Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing louder, the sound of approaching law enforcement or federal response guided by the journalist. Jack let the weight of exhaustion close over him, comforted by the knowledge that the evidence was out. The truth secured the mission complete. Rex pressed closer, lying across Jack's chest, guarding him even in the silence that followed. Morning broke over the mountains, hours later. Agents stormed the ranger station, weapons drawn, but the fight was over. They found Rourke lifeless, his men scattered, and Jack alive, though barely Rex refusing to leave his side. Days later, in a hospital bed overlooking the hills, Jack learned that the files had been published. Names, contracts, and evidence of treason filled every screen in the country. Arrests followed swiftly, and the network crumbled. Colonel Rourke's legacy was reduced to betrayal exposed. Jack Carter remained scarred both in body and spirit, but he was no longer alone in carrying the truth. Rex lay at his feet, his head resting on the blanket, amber eyes unblinking, a guardian as steadfast as ever. Jack looked at him and managed a smile, weary but true. We found our way through, boy. Outside, the Appalachian wind carried the scent of pine and rain, clean and unbroken. For the first time in years, Jack Carter felt the weight lift, not entirely gone, but lighter, shared by the truth he had fought to release, and the loyalty of the companion who had never let him fall. That was the journey of Jack Carter and his loyal dog Rex, a battle fought not on foreign soil, but in the quiet heart of America. If their story of loyalty, betrayal, and courage held your attention, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that echo with truth and sacrifice. Now, we'd like to hear from you. What moment struck you the most? Was it the discovery of the hidden Humvee, the betrayal by an old comrade, or the final stand against the mastermind? And where are you watching from today? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone.